As a documentary filmmaker, I've spent hundreds of hours talking with gay and lesbian people about their lives. One of the recurring topics has been the mixed feelings people often have about religion and spirituality. Some religions even seem to be at the core of the opposition to the queer community's fight for civil rights.
You were not born to be homosexual. When are you people gonna stop? When the men are having sex with the boys?
It's no surprise that a lot of gay people really struggle with and even hate religion. But what about spirituality, something other than religion? I set out with my video camera on a cross-country adventure to talk to people about their spirituality. Many I spoke with were writers, thinkers, and teachers on this topic. The question is, what is queer spirituality? One of my first stops was in Asheville, North Carolina, where I met Andrew Raymer, who was visiting from San Francisco. As someone who is a writer, storyteller, and educator, and one of the first people I interviewed, I asked Andrew what his thoughts were on gay spirituality, and what the focus of this film should be.
Well, I'm going to look directly at the camera, Tom Murray, and I'm going to say, I can no more answer that question now than you can answer the question about where is this film going. At this point in my life, I'm really surprised that I have a deeply engaged Jewish practice. And I know that often when people are filling out profiles online, they say spiritual but not religious. And I describe myself as spiritual and religious. They weave together in some ways, but in other ways they're separate. I think there's a moment where we have to own our own lineage, even if our lineage doesn't want us in it. That we stop and we say, I am gay and Catholic, I am gay and Southern Baptist, I am gay and Mormon, I am gay and Jewish. I own the texts as much as anyone else. And I see in places in the gay spirituality movement that there's a lot of tension, and always has been, between the essentialists who believe there is an innate nature that we express, and the constructivists who say we're creating our lives, there was no gay life 100 years ago or 10,000 years ago. And I think it's a little bit of both, that we're always inventing who we are. And so the questions I'm curious when this film comes together is, what is gay spirituality? Is there such a thing? Or is gay spirituality simply the spirituality that gay people have? So I have a question.
Sure.
So what is this like behind the camera for you on your own spiritual journey? Whether that's defined in however you define it, to be talking to us and listening to us.
It was an interesting thought. Previously, a friend had mentioned how the topic of spirituality keeps appearing in my films, yet I wasn't fully clear why I chose to discuss spirituality for this project. Raised on a dairy farm, I had an Irish Catholic upbringing at a rural church. I recall being pretty faithful as a kid, even serving as an altar boy. I remember fantasies of being a missionary, traveling overseas to do work as part of the Catholic Church. I recall the awe and respect we all had for the nuns and priests and their special connection to God.
I went to an all-boys Catholic high school in Queens that was run by the Maris brothers. I was so fortunate to have had those brothers teach me, to have gone away on retreats with them during high school, to get to know them as people, and to really feel for the very first time in my life this sense of deep, heartfelt connection to spirit. And so that's why after my college years I decided to enter religious life and join them. We were asked, what kind of volunteer work would we like to do while we were studying in the novitiate, and I said I would like to do AIDS work, and they said, well, we don't really have anybody doing that, and we're not really sure how you'd go about that, but we'll figure it out. Shortly after that, I was reading Out Week, which was a real hot gay magazine in New York. It was all about ACT UP and all the kind of political stuff that was going on in the gay community in New York City. And in the back there was an ad, and it drew my attention because it was an illustration of St. Francis of Assisi. All it really said in the ad was, we are looking to start an AIDS ministry, and if you're interested, call this number. And I did, and that number was for Father Michael Judge, who many now know from, he was the New York City fire chaplain who died in the World Trade Center on September 11th. And so I called him and I went in to meet with him, and he said, okay, it's me and you, we're the only two, you're the only one that's answered the ad. But over the next couple of weeks, 3 more guys joined us, and so we were a group of 5 called St. Francis AIDS Ministry. When we would go visit people with AIDS in hospitals or in their homes, for the most part, they and their families were super welcoming to us. But as the years progressed, the church kind of became the enemy, at least in New York, in the eyes of the gay community. And so oftentimes when we'd walk into someone's hospital room wearing our clerical garb, we were asked by patients or their family members to leave. We were not welcome in their rooms. And I remember saying to one man, well, I'm gay. And he said, but you represent a church that has taught me to hate myself. And so you're not welcome. And at that point, I really felt, well, what is my role here as an openly gay man who is a brother in the Catholic Church? And I remember having a good long talk with Michael Judge. He had rented a beach house for us in New Jersey as a little retreat for the 5 of us. And I walked along the beach with him and told him about this experience I had had and how really conflicted I felt, that the gay community kind of was pulling me one way away from the church, and the church was kind of pulling me away from my involvement with gay issues. In my 20s, as a young brother, felt like I was, I felt like it wasn't healthy for me to continue continue to be in this place where I felt so torn. I couldn't make peace with those 2 sides of myself, with my involvement to the gay community and my involvement with the Catholic Church. Sometimes I look back on it and I think maybe I gave up too soon. It was going to take young people like me to move the church forward, but we all left. I was in the novitiate with 8 guys, and 4 years later, all of us were gone, because we really felt that conflict. And it just made more sense for us to leave the church, which is what we did, for better or for worse.
God is here.
When I'm singing, every word that I sing, I am deliberately finding a way for that word to bring hope to someone who is hopeless, or to bring hope to someone who may be hopeless later. And I also deliberately change words to include the LGBT community and the heterosexual community. I do that because I believe that we need to hear ourselves mentioned in holy music because we're holy also. And the music comes from this place in the center of my soul. For a lot of gay people, they really do feel that God has condemned them, and that it's the Word of God, it's the Word of Jesus, that they cannot be gay and Christian. And I never went through that. I never felt that God didn't love me. I never felt that there was a secret between me and God. It was always clear that it was the church. And I truly was able to separate the two. I knew from my childhood that I wouldn't have been here if it hadn't been from God. My mother had 5 tumors carrying me, and I was their only child. And 3 times the doctors brought papers saying, you know, this child is not going to survive, you may not survive. My mother went into a hospital for 3 months until my birth. And so I was raised with them telling me that God really wanted me to be here. I have buried people who killed themselves because of how their family or their church treated them. I have sat with parents who had just learned that their child even had faith. I remember one mother, I said, she knew her son was dying of AIDS about a month before he died. He moved back home. She called the church because she said he had told her that he was gay. So she thought maybe that was something that she could do. His funeral could be at an MCC. I sat down and I said, okay, well, this is his favorite scripture. I didn't know he even read the Bible. I didn't even know he had a favorite scripture. I said, see, he marked it right here in his Bible. I didn't even know he had a Bible. He sang in the choir. I didn't even know he sung church music. They don't know us because we have watched what they have done to those who they did find out about, even in the family, because they're taught by churches that gay, lesbian people, that bisexual and transgender people don't really have a right to have faith, to believe that God loves them. It's clear to me that if you've once had faith, it stays in there somewhere. God is
As I was working on this film, an acquaintance of mine spoke about his own spiritual experience that came after dealing with an addiction. a problem facing many in our community. I met with Brian Wilmoth at the Rainbow Bridge, an addiction treatment center for LGBT people located in the Silver Lake area of Los Angeles. Brian talked about his own journey and what role spirituality has played in his life and what has worked for others.
Well, there are many 12-step programs nowadays, but the crux of all of them, the one thing they all have in common is that they suggest or encourage a belief in a power greater than yourself. People who have a hard time with the church, will believe that the group is their higher power, and they'll run things by the group to make the good orderly direction that they need. And when I say good orderly direction, I mean G-O-D, I mean God. One of the things that happened in my journey through spirituality was that, we go back and we make amends to some of the people that we've harmed. And one of the things that I had done is when I was an altar boy, I used to steal the altar boy money, or the altar money from the collection to go buy drugs. So several years later, I went back to make amends for this. And after a long conversation with my priest, who was the same priest that I grew up with, he thanked me for making amends and forgave me for being gay. And so I walked away from there with a very different perspective on how it still is. As much as I think we've made progress, especially spiritually, we have a long way to go. Well, one of the things that I've been asked to do and is to go in and clean up before the parents come in and see children's apartment, and especially with gay men, there are three things that I have found in common. Whether they've committed suicide or they've been sent to rehab, when all of that happens, their life is left exactly how it was. They were drug and alcohol paraphernalia, bottles, pipes, all kinds of things like that. Sex paraphernalia, all kinds of toys, lots of porno. And oddly enough, stacks and stacks of dog-eared books on spirituality. And what that told me is there is such a desperate need for it. We are looking so hard that we're missing what's right in front of us. It's not in the books. It's in reaching out to people and being kind. I think we will learn how to be kind to ourselves when we learned how to be kind to other people. I don't think we know how to do it the other way around. If you begin to look for things that you can do for people, you will find them. And if you begin to find them, you will begin to find God in the littlest places, in the most obscure places, and in the people that you least expect to find it in.
I met Sharon Shabbat, who is co-founder of the group, A Center for Inner Peace, located near San Francisco. Sharon, who was raised in an orphanage run by the Catholic Church, is now very involved with a Course in Miracles.
I'm just going to say it has become my life. It has become my life. It has shown me that we don't need to be ashamed for being gay, okay? We are who we are. We are no different than, I don't care who it is. I really got to see that we are equal. No one is better than, no one is less than. And one of my favorite lines that the Course teaches, teach only love, for that is what you are. I was raised in Cincinnati, Ohio, and raised in an institution called St. Joseph's Orphanage. Just by being in an institution, just by being in an orphanage, you think you're bad to begin with. But then I joined the service, and I joined, it's a combination of, mostly because it was another institution, another orphanage. Nothing about war. I knew nothing about war. It was in the military that I learned about my sexuality. Came time for re-enlistment, and when I learned that I was being sent to France, I literally freaked. My fear was I'll never return, and that was my fear from childhood. I was advised by a friend to tell them I was queer. That was a word we used at that time. I went to the commanding officer, and he had been very, very great the whole time all along. And he said to me, I do not believe that you are queer. I do not believe that. He said, but you will be going, you're going back to Captain so-and-so, and he will be taken over from now on. And at this time, they did not have women officers in the psych department. It was always the male. And he was very threatening. He was really bad news. But I went to his office, and he literally started tearing my different insignias off my shoulder and told me to disrobe and get out of the military uniform. It's like, whoa, what is going on? And he said, as of now, you're no longer in the military. And as of now, you are no longer a citizen of the United States. And I took it in, and I believed it. I believed it from the age of 19 until my mid-40s. That's right. And because of that belief, it caused homelessness. It caused a lot of stuff.
At one point, being a lesbian brought about a really dark period in Sharon's life.
I almost attempted suicide. I was that desperate. In a moment of jumping, I sat there and I said, if I jump here, the wind's going to grab me, and I'm not going to die. It's going to carry me this way. I'm going to be a vegetable, okay? It's going to carry me in these bushes. I'm standing there thinking this stuff. So I need to move down more so that when I land, that's it. At the point of getting up to move, something caught my eye, and I looked down at the other end of the bridge, and I saw this man at the other end of the bridge, and I thought, Jesus Christ, he's going to jump. He's going to jump. And I ran down to him, and I said, you don't want to do this. He was Hispanic, and he looked at me, I said, you don't want to do this. And I touched his shoulder, and I said, you don't want to do this. No, no, no. And he looked at me, and I knew when I saw his eyes, he was going to do it. And I ran to my house, and I picked up the phone, called 911, and I said, there's a young man, he's going to jump. She said, yes, we got many calls. She said, and by the way, did you happen to catch the other person? Someone said there was 2 people. I said, oh, that person, he or she moved on. I don't know what happened. But they're no longer there. Yeah. Something happens. Something happens. Even, I keep saying, in the most desperate. And there are many youngsters out there today who are very desperate. Many old ones of us, okay, who are very desperate. And if we can just we're not alone. Yeah, we can't feel them, okay? But we are surrounded with spirit. We are surrounded with people, and I say people, spirits, who are trying to guide us. And if we can just remember, who was it when you were a kid that really, really, really loved you? That spirit's still with you. Something is truly guiding you. No, it's not God. No, it's not, it could be Mary, who knows? Who knows? But someone is with you to guide you. No, it's not religion. No, it's connection. That's what it is. That's it. So I didn't go off the bridge. Didn't go off.
Well, I never became a missionary. In my early 20s, I spent 2 years living in southern India as a Peace Corps volunteer. For the first time, I was exposed to other spiritual thoughts such as Hinduism, yoga, Islam, and even various forms of Christianity that are surprisingly prevalent in that part of India. It was a time where I began to question my Catholic upbringing. It also coincided with my first exploration with the notion of being gay. While first researching this project, I found a book titled Gay Spirituality, written by author Toby Johnson. For many years, Toby has written and talked about spirituality in the queer community. As a young man, he was mentored by the famous author Joseph Campbell, whose books such as The Power of Myth explore the notion of spirituality in the modern world. I spoke with Toby at his home in Austin, Texas, where he lives with his partner Kip. As a young man, Toby was involved in monastic life in the Catholic Church. I asked Toby to describe what he means by gay spirituality.
Certainly there's a way in which when you use the word spiritual, you simply mean being aware of the interior life of human beings. And in that sense, everybody's spiritual, and spirituality means being aware that you are conscious and being aware of your consciousness. Campbell talked about what he called the new myth. What is the new myth that is coming that will sweep humankind the way the myths of old, like Christianity, swept Europe? I think what the new myth is the understanding of the nature of myth. Being able to see the stories from over and above. Well, when you rise above, you've changed the very nature of what you understand the religion to be. The world of dualism, that is good and evil, good versus evil, heaven versus hell, God versus the devil, male versus female. That whole idea of the universe divided into two camps that are adversarial towards each other is an outgrowth of heterosexuality. In a very natural, normal way, heterosexual people experience that the world is divided between male and female. And they understand that the world divides between yin and yang, and the goal is to bring these into harmony. Well, for gay people, we have this harmony inside ourselves already. We blend masculine and feminine in ourselves. So I think we don't see the world as divided dualistically. Christianity doesn't have this tradition of androgynous gods, but if you go to other religions, if you look at Buddhism or Hinduism, you find that there is a long tradition of stories about gods who cross-dress, who transform from male to female, or who are both male and female. Being able to believe in all the gods is to believe in none of them, but to rise to a higher position in which all the gods are seen as clues to something more important, something more. I think that our homosexuality for us is that clue to something more.
I traveled to Georgia where I spoke with Daniel Helminiak. Daniel, who is a former Catholic priest, is now a professor at a university near Atlanta. He has written several books about queer spirituality.
I still consider myself Roman Catholic. I have good reasons. They're traditional reasons. I mean, they go back in history. And they're more academic, intellectual reasons than anything else. I mean, I was at Sunday Mass this morning. In fact is, I put in earplugs and meditated in silence for half of the Mass because I can't deal with the verbiage. And I have no intention of leaving, though I won't fight to the death to defend the Pope. On the contrary. That question, that's the question of coming out in a religious tradition. I think that is probably the hardest thing that anybody has to deal with. And it's also the moment of potential massive spiritual maturity. It makes people who see from outside, they're no longer caught in the system and they're seeing from another perspective. That's a gay theme, coming out, stepping outside of the system and recognizing that much of it is just a facade. And to be able to do that and still remain an honest, good-willed person is going to open people to tremendous otherworldly, if we can say that, experiences, and also make them into people who are going to be really contributors to good, healthy society. I think that's what's at stake in that whole process of coming out and leaving religion, struggling with religion.
In the Dominican Republic, I had the most extraordinary experience of worshiping with our congregation there in their very first building, in their first little storefront that they fixed up. And
people in the LGBT community have often felt very betrayed by religion, and that religion is the undergirding force behind a lot of homophobia and the history of homophobia. So religion has this terrible baggage, especially in our community. And when I came out in the early 70s, people were very hostile toward religion of any kind, and so being part of MCC was kind of an odd, almost anachronistic experience. How are you putting these two things together? People often say, I'm spiritual, as a way to say, but I'm not religious. Sometimes if you've grown up in one religion and you've felt betrayed by it, people often look to something very different as a way to maybe find their way back to some personal peace or to a sense of connection to something broader and to community. Because there is something that happens when you're part of a community and there is transformation going on that feels like it transcends the ordinary. And there are people who find that in religion and who find that in religious systems and in church or in synagogue or in those specific places. And there are people who maybe touch the edges of that, but want to be perhaps a little less committed to institution, but free to experiment and to be open to other ways of being connected to the divine. In one sense, you'd say there is a queer sensibility or lens or take on everything, and that would include, of course, spirituality. I also think that in every movement for human justice, dignity, for civil rights, there is a component of spirituality, because this is a transformational experience. Coming out is a transformational experience. Having the courage to stand up for yourself and your community is a spiritual experience.
By the 70s, I was living in Chicago and fully involved in gay life there, but not fully out to family and friends. I knew many gay men at that time who had set spirituality and religion aside because of the way that many feel that religious institutions often discard and mistreat gay people. Probably not being able to be totally out and open had to do with my own shame and guilt, a carryover from my Catholic upbringing, something hard to shake. My feeling about religion at that time was, why even bother? A prominent writer and teacher in the world of queer spirituality is Christian de la Huerta. His book titled Coming Out Spiritually has sold numerous copies. Christian continues to write and conduct spiritual retreats around the country. I met with him on a breezy day at his home near Miami. I asked him about his journey and his work.
I believe that we're experiencing a spiritual awakening. And I come from sort of paraphrasing Einstein, that you can't solve a problem from the same level of consciousness in which it was created. So that as a species, the only way that we're going to get out of this hole that we have dug ourselves into, for me, is a spiritual answer. It's got to be a spiritual revolution, a way of thinking that's outside of the box. And I know in the fabrics of my being that people that we today call gay or lesbian or bi or trans or queer have a particular role to play in supporting that awakening. And I think that the kind of related issue to that is that all the liberation movements have had a spiritual birth and source and foundation, and except for ours. Because we were so conflicted about this, understandably, and so wounded by religion, and no wonder, given the treatment that we have received at the hands of religion and continue to receive at the hands of most religions. But again, what's ironic about that, it's that there's so much evidence that we have been the keepers of beauty, the mediators, the scouts of consciousness, the healers, teachers. Throughout history, there's so much evidence that we have played these roles beautifully. We all have this universal imperative to be who we are to the fullest, no matter what, no matter what the consequences may be, no matter who thinks that I should be this or that. Not only in terms of sexuality, but in terms of who I am in the world. And I like to think of it in this way, that there isn't another being in this universe, or any other universe, that combines the same genetics and the same set of experiences that makes me the unique being that I am. So if I don't bring that to fruition, to full expression, who will? And to me, that's what coming out spiritually ultimately means. And it's a call for all of us, no matter how we feel and express our love and how we express our sexuality.
While visiting San Francisco, I spoke with Jay Michelson, who is a writer, scholar, and activist. His work focuses on the intersections of spirituality, Judaism, sexuality, and law. Jay was in San Francisco to speak at a gay Jewish synagogue.
And so in the next 5 minutes, I want to actually give you a very different David and Jonathan account from the one that
I'm a nice Jewish boy gone bad.
Right, so here's the beginning.
I was raised to be a good Jewish lawyer, and I got very close. I went to Yale Law School and went through a very conventional American Jewish, not to say privileged American Jewish childhood. But I found quickly, I guess as a lot of people do when they go to college, that Judaism was very good at asking certain questions and very bad at providing answers. So I started looking elsewhere. I dabbled in Buddhist meditation and in other practices, and ultimately moved away from Judaism and then moved to a very observant form of Judaism, Orthodox Jewish practice, for 10 years.
We could spend the rest of the time talking about women, which I'm sure is exactly what the men's group wants.
It's only in the last 10 years of my life that I've kind of moved away from any notion of coherence in my own spiritual practice. I am a Buju, a Buddhist Jew now, and I take liberally from multiple traditions. I'm a professional spiritual Jew in that I direct a national organization that is about LGBT Jewish spirituality. And we run spiritual retreats and other programs for queer Jews, allies, and partners. Spirituality and religion are largely about love. And so how we love other human beings surely affects how we love the divine and understand our relationship to it. For me to imagine that the way my erotic and romantic self is configured has nothing to do or has only a little to do with how my spiritual side expresses itself, and that assumption is just nonsense. When one is so marginalized and excluded from normative discourses, as queer people are. Of course, one option is kind of sadness and repression, but the only other option that I know of is to see through the bullshit and to see that these forms are perhaps valuable tools and technologies, but ultimately nothing can really be taken so seriously because oppression is always just perched right on our shoulder. There has to be a moment at which you just say, this is who I am, and if that means I'm going to hell, that's what it means. And then there's that next unfolding where all of a sudden hell turns into heaven, right? Where through that gateway of the acceptance of the reality of love comes the awareness of the divine.
Wholeness is a really important word for all of us, and holiness comes from wholeness, and not being fragmented, right, is a really important thing in terms of spirituality and religion. Well, I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area as a Roman Catholic, and I was a good Catholic boy, wanted to become a priest. And when I found out that I was gay, I looked up homosexuality in the Catholic Encyclopedia and realized that, there wasn't really a place for me. I practiced as a Wall Street lawyer for a number of years, until I woke up one morning and I said, I just don't know what I stand for anymore. And that's when I decided to take a biblical Hebrew class up at Union Theological Seminary and fell back in love with the theology that my desire to serve God and my vocation. It's understandable how a lot of people have been really hurt by organized religion, and spirituality is a really important way for healing people. For anyone who is wrestling with spirituality versus religion, I'd say that's fine. And I know for myself, it wasn't like I was able to go from, openly gay person and then all of a sudden become a theologian, right? I mean, it's been a journey of a long time. Because of our LGBT status, we come from the margins, we make people look at things afresh, and we challenge the status quo. If you think about Christianity, frankly, I think it's one of the queerest religions where, God has become flesh and God has been executed on a cross. And if you look at the Gospels and the parables, they're all about sort of people on the margins, right? Jesus touched the people that no one else would touch, the bleeding people, the people with skin diseases, the Samaritans. It's ironic, ever since Christianity got taken over by the Roman Empire in the 320s, that the tables have turned, and so Christianity has become the dominant force. So really the gift that we queer people bring is a reminder of the roots of where Christianity comes from.
I met with some of the teachers from a gay men's yoga group. I spoke with Darren Main about the spiritual nature of yoga for himself and for his students.
We went through the whole catechism and church every Sunday, and I was an altar boy and did that whole thing. Things started to happen. I hit puberty, I became a sexual being, and many of the things that were very simple as a child were no longer simple as an adult or a young adult, and I started to question, and it no longer worked for me, and many of the doctrines that the church professed conflicted with what I was feeling. And so I sort of abandoned the church altogether. I didn't want anything to do with it. So I found the joys of drugs and started doing a lot of drugs when I was about 14, 15 years old, which culminated in a suicide attempt when I was 17. And it was out of that I found the 12 steps and started this spiritual path which involved yoga and meditation. What was amazing about the yogic practice, unlike my previous experience with Catholicism, was that it embraced the body. It wasn't about denial of the body, it was about celebrating it. I teach 7 or 8 classes a week. I travel all over the country and teach. I teach workshops, some for a mixed group of people, but I do a lot of workshops and classes just for gay men. It's nice to see so many members of the queer community just flocking to yoga. And I think it's reminiscent of my own experience that so many mainstream religions have pushed us to the side and made us feel unwelcome. I feel like my role as a yoga teacher in the gay community is first and foremost helping us to heal ourselves. And when we do that, then all the gay men and lesbian women that and trans men and women that then go out into the world it has that ripple effect, but it has to start at home. We can't start with trying to change the hearts and minds of people that we hardly know.
I made a return trip to India in the 80s. While I remember my awareness of the way many people there seem to integrate spirituality into their day-to-day lives, by that time I was fairly cynical about religion and thought more about scientific explanations about the world rather than the supernatural. While so engaged in queer life back in Chicago, I remained closeted when meeting old friends during my visit. I think the notion of dual lives is something that defined many queer people at that time. As I look back, it fed a darkness beneath the outer veneer. I believe something that was shared by many. While most of my conversations for this film were from an observer's perspective, on a trip to Salt Lake City, I met with Jerry Bowie, who formed the group Queer Spirit. Along with John Cottrell, they conduct spiritual retreats aimed primarily at gay men. I had the opportunity to attend and participate in a weekend retreat Jerry held at his home. With the Utah location, it was no surprise that most of the men attending had roots in Mormonism, perceived as one of the most intolerant religions towards homosexuality.
Much of what we have in our society is we look at being queer as a deficit, as a problem, particularly in this community here in Utah. People are trying to change their sexuality, and so it's often viewed as a deficit. And we're saying being queer is a gift. John's going to lead us through some movement exercises to connect body, mind, spirit. This evening we will participate in a sweat lodge ceremony, and most of our day will be preparing for that ceremony so that when men go into that space, they're prepared and ready and able to receive what's going to happen in that experience. A lot of indigenous cultures, including Native Americans, look at life in the circle, and that circle encompasses all of life. Nothing is ever excluded from that circle.
One of the things that we'll do this morning for our mini March retreat that we're doing is opening up with some yoga movement and using some of the principles of yoga. And going with the dynamic and theme of our retreat today, which is finding your own medicine, is moving inside, coming inside of self, looking within. And I like to experience yoga and the yoga experience as a way of quieting the mind, quieting the body. Yoga gives us that opportunity to stop, to be still, and begin to contemplate. We're experiencing and looking at, who are we? Who are we as queer men? Perhaps even redefining ourselves, starting or even continuing a journey of finding who we really are, our true authentic self. I think what we're doing today isn't necessarily religion, but certainly a way of maybe redefining or really allowing spirit to rise out of whatever your beliefs may be. Whatever the rituals and practices that may have come from a organized religion, if you have one, but certainly something maybe just slightly above that, perhaps, that's all-encompassing, that everyone can identify with, a spirituality.
Before the event got underway, I talked with Darren Adams, who was previously fully engaged in the Mormon Church, even spending time in South America doing mission work for the church. Although struggling with the knowledge of being gay for some time, Darren married and began to raise a family. His coming out and recent divorce has caused a reevaluation of organized religion and even the notion of God.
I've known since I was 5 that I was attracted to men, not women. Just when I had those school kid crushes on my fellow friends as opposed to the girls in the classes. So, I've known it for a long time. It's something that I struggled against and learned to repress. And as I prepared for my mission and after, especially in college, is when I really started confronting it and talked to some of my Mormon bishops about it, and their advice was to go ahead and follow the program of the church, go on a mission. After my 2-year missionary service, return home and get married and start having children. And once I got married and started having relations with a good woman, then all of these attractions would go away.
It didn't work.
It didn't work. The very same questioning in my mind that led me to ultimately question, am I gay or not, ultimately led me to question some fundamentals about who God is and my place in the universe, and does God exist, does he not? If I'm gay and the church is wrong that there aren't gay people, what else could the church be wrong about? And with Mormons, you sort of take the whole thing or you leave the whole thing. It's very hard to be a cafeteria Mormon. You can't pick and choose as you go down the assembly line of truth. People often ask me, so when did you start challenging believing in God? Ironically, for me, it was becoming a father that ultimately led me to question God's existence. And usually when I say that, people are like, well, wait, becoming a father? I would think that parenthood strengthens your belief in God. For me, it was very much a question of, Mormons believe that God is our Heavenly Father and that we are His children. The problem is that Heavenly Father has very strict rules about behavior and not. And so if you don't live according to Heavenly Father's rules in Mormonism, in the afterlife, you basically are cut off from His presence. And so, as a father, I started thinking about my children, and I have 3 amazing kids, and And when I started thinking, well, what could my children do that would really make me ever want to separate myself completely from them? Could they do anything? And my answer was, I don't think my kids ever could do anything that would cause me to stop loving them or say, sorry kids, you're out of the house forever. And so I started thinking about it, well, if the Mormon God believes that and is willing to have his children not be with him, why did my love as a father seem more embracing and more perfect than the LDS God? And so he became very distant and very capricious almost, I suppose. And that's really what started me on the path of, well, what if God doesn't exist? Or at least God like the Mormon version of God. That's ultimately what led me to today. I would classify myself with a lot of different terms. I would say I'm a secular humanist. I believe I'm a naturalist. Naturalist is the term I prefer more to atheist. I believe the universe operates according to natural laws and natural principles as opposed to supernatural laws and supernatural principles. So I believe very much in energy and connection and in even this thing that we call spirit, which is a human symbolic word for this unknowable phenomenon that exists, resonance or harmony, or so spirituality remains a very important part of my life, even though I no longer believe in a supernatural being who governs life. To come to a retreat like this, in which I hope to be challenged spiritually, I hope to be challenged and continue to ask the questions that I've been asking the last 5 years of my life, and maybe through new metaphors or maybe through new associations and new connections with new people, hopefully I'll find a deeper sense of spirituality.
Following the event, I spoke with Jerry about his work and his thoughts on queer spirituality.
I believe that what we're doing is a very strong and powerful level of activism. We are activating parts of the queer soul that need to be realized and enlivened. If I understand my place and I see myself as that we're all critical components of this organism we call life. For many queer people, though, we've been socialized and domesticated to marginalize ourselves, to stand in the shadows. Queer spirit specifically is zeroing in on the queer stories, acknowledging our stories, recognizing that we share stories, and we also have the opportunity to transform those stories in very powerful ways. This is community. This is the pinnacle of our potential as queer men.
Participating in the weekend events in Sweat Lodge was a very powerful experience personally. Jerry and his partner Bruce adhere strongly to the Native American traditions of the Sweat Lodge. In southern Idaho, I met with Native American Clyde Hall, who has mentored Jerry. Clyde has been involved with social and spiritual issues among queer people for many years. I asked him to talk about the notion of two spirits and its meaning to gay people.
With the Native American people, the sense of being of an in-between person, that goes way, way back. That goes back probably for millennia. The traditions of the Native American people, of course, being an in-between being a person basic, kind of like regarded as a third sex. There's a great power in that, because in all things, the in-between, neither up nor down, fish nor fowl, or whatever, has a great, what's called medicine power. And because they are messengers between two worlds. And that's basically the way the Native American people thought of the two-spirit people traditionally. Now, of course, with the advent of Christianity being crammed down people's throats in the the turn of last century, 1890s, 1870s, even farther back as the 1860s. The old traditions and practices went by the wayside. They went underground. We were all brought to this world for a purpose. Whether we manifest that purpose or not is up to us in this life. And being whether you're Indian, whether you're a gay person, whether you're black, white, yellow, whatever. But the choice is yours. If you lead a spirit-led life, the Spirit will give you all types of opportunities. The Spirit was kind of like a shell game. They'll give you all types of things that you can pick and choose from. It's all up to you to ask. But it's up to you to decide and pick and choose too. I have a meditation that I always do every morning, and I always say in the evening, I say, well, Spirit, I put myself into your hands. Lead me to wonderful places and wonderful people. And that's an absolute trust, an implicit, explicit trust that I do, that Spirit is going to lead me to good things. And if you put it that way, well, then you're going to attract those kind of good things. And that's all living a Spirit-led life and living with the Spirit every day, every minute. Native American people, we don't put on our best clothes and go to church on Sunday, then I put our spirituality in a little box and continue to live our lives. We live our spirituality 24/7. It's every day, every minute. Everything that we do is a manifestation of that spirituality. Why accept yourself for being a second-class citizen in your own country? And that goes for Indian people as well as gay people. Why settle for second best? That isn't what America's all about. You know, you've got to be the best you possibly can.
I grew up in India, southern part of India, a city called Coimbatore, and I was born and raised as a Hindu. But growing up, you know, my family has been really very open about religion. Even though we were raised as Hindus, we are not overtly very traditionally religious family. I never heard any sermons or Hindu temple sermons, anything at all, overtly against homosexuality. Never ever. So I can say that my religion doesn't discriminate against homosexuality. And Hinduism in general, there is no book anywhere written saying that homosexuality is wrong and you'll burn in hell, or something like spelled out like it's overtly against homosexuality. But growing up, only community was visible was the Hijra community. People who are intersex people, or it could be people, castrated men, or men living as a woman. So they fall through the cracks because the society or there is no infrastructure that supports their identity. And you hear all these weird stories and horrible stories in the newspapers, and how they were beaten up and left for dead, or how they were sexually assaulted, or you see them that they're being treated like animals on the streets. So growing up, I had the fear that, because I don't have any other reference to, you know, being gay, that I was so scared, petrified by that particular thought that, oh my God, what would happen if somebody just thinks that I am Hijra, and then they drag me into that group and I have to live a miserable life, which obviously I'm not a Hijra because I don't identify myself as a female. And that's the biggest fear growing up, and I had a very low self-esteem because of that. I was not overtly religious person at that point, but I started going to temples, particular temples, just to get some strength. My spiritual journey did not start until later in my life, because even though after I came to States, I was really very unhappy for a longer time. You know, I learned about mind, body and soul. You see, as the physical form, we don't realize that there is a soul inside us which makes who we are, and the physical body is nothing but a shell. It is such a joy to realize that, oh my God, I'm a soul, which is something like, you know, it doesn't have a religion, the soul doesn't have a name, the soul doesn't have a gender. Imagine that you're growing up, somebody called you your name, somebody called me Surav, then I said, okay, my name is Surav. Oh, you're a male. I said, okay, I'm a male. Then say, oh, you're Indian. And then I said, okay, I'm Indian. But when I was born, I didn't know any of these identities. You know, these are the identities that are imposed on you because of your social construct and society where you're living in. And that kind of freed me up. Also, my sexuality also, okay, it's also freed me up. Just because I'm attracted to male, okay, fine, that's part of my physical urge. It's not the inside me, it's nothing to do with my soul.
South of the Bay Area in San Jose, I met with Dottie Boone, who is a psychic. She has formed a unique worship community with an eclectic mix of members.
You might have two men holding hands and two women holding hands, and you might have a baby running in and out, and a husband and wife talking to each other. I mean, it's so eclectic. What we're building here is a community. It's not just a church. All these people come together and they can talk about, I had a dream last night, what do you think it was? Or this is, you know, you'll hear somebody say, this is a horrible month. What number month is this for me? Is this a first, second? What is the number? So we ask our numerologist, oh my gosh, I feel like I've got a dark cloud over me. We talk to an astrologer and find out, you know, where this is coming from. And that gives people doing spiritual work a sense that they're absolutely okay. There's nothing wrong with them. And especially, too, as I said, we have about a third, I'd say, of either pagan or Wiccan, whichever they're going to call themselves. They work with the goddess energy. And we have goddess workshops here, and we also have yoga here, and we have drumming. And we want people to get in touch with what makes them feel best as who they are, instead of having a church or a religion that keeps telling them they're wrong. I've found that a lot of times people come here because they have found they can't be someplace else, and they like it because it's comfortable. It's been a place that I'd say half of my congregation is also in the AA programs also. So what they have found is there's a spirituality there. How do I define spirituality? It's believing that God energy is in each one of us, and that each one of us is a child of God, and that the only way you can get rid of hate is with love, not with more hate.
After the Sunday service, I spoke briefly with some of the gay and lesbian members of the congregation.
I'm kind of what you call a cashew. You know, what that means is I'm, one of my parents was Jewish and one of my parents was Catholic.
Oh.
And while I felt very fortunate that my family wasn't a devout anything, you know, still going into those traditional forms of religion, there was not acceptance of LGBT peoples, and there's not an acceptance of my lifestyle or of my partner. And there was a kind of a nonverbal, if you want to be a part of the church, then you need to keep quiet about what is your life all about. We have to open up to the depths of, you know, our woundedness, the depths of our trauma, to be able to come to the depths of our healing. And we need a safe place to do that. And that's where the Center for Creative Living comes in. It gives us that safe place, that sanctuary, and that community. Because so many of us are isolated. We're isolated in our own, you know, journeys.
I've been to other different gay and lesbian churches, but what I didn't like is that they were all gay and lesbian. There was no integration, and they were all still of an organized religion facet. Didn't allow me to develop my spirituality. Here, we get to be who we are, but we also get to be who we are amongst what's quote unquote mainstream society. So we're teaching all the other quote unquote straight people out there how to interact with gay and lesbians, versus being in a gay and lesbian church and everybody, of course, gay and lesbian. So you're not really outreaching anything, you know. So, and that for me is important, is for us to integrate, you know, to integrate them into our lives and us into their lives, to become one society. Become one spiritual society. We can't do it in isolation.
Some weeks later, I traveled to Highlands, North Carolina to get a first-hand look at the Gay Spirit Visions event.
20 years ago, 3 gay men of a radical fairy background coming out of a community called Running Water decided, as that community was changing, to create a conference a more structured gathering where gay men could meet. And it took a while for them to find a conference center to do that, but they were welcomed here, and we have now been here for 20 years. Their notion, which we followed, was to have an opening ritual, a closing ritual, to have space called a heart circle where everyone would have a chance to share. And as our community's gotten bigger, the sharing has gone from anything you want to say to very few words, but it's still an opportunity to hear everyone in the gathering stand up, be present, name themselves, name where they come from, say why they're here, and share a little bit about what goes on. To have this little island of time once a year where I am in a world of my gay brothers is really important to me.
I met with David Salyer, who is the presiding elder of GSV.
I think one of the great secrets in this country is that gay and lesbian people have spiritual lives. I think people get so hung up on this sexuality that they forget that we're whole human beings and that we long for a relationship with our higher power. I did. And I know if that was true for me, it has to be true for other people. I think that it's an opportunity for some healing. It's also an opportunity to get exposed to a variety of spiritual paths. So, we'll have men who are Jewish and still very much part of that faith, and we have Christians, of course. And sometimes we're even accused of not talking. Somebody would, you don't talk about Christ. Let's talk about Christ. Let's bring Christ up, and it gets talked about. Sometimes it's a little uncomfortable because in the room you've also got pagans and Wiccans and people who've more or less made up their own. We're still relevant for men who are older, men in their 40s and their 50s, and we will have men who are in their 70s. And for them, I think there probably is still some healing that goes on. So I guess the question would be, is Gay Spirit Visions going to outlive its usefulness? Is there going to be a need for us in 20 years? Are we going to be relevant? And I don't know. And quite honestly, there's a part of me that says it would be great if we weren't having to treat all those wounds.
While at the Gay Spirit Visions event, I met my friend Jerry Colley, who has attended a number of retreats. He talked about his time there and what GSV means to him.
I think the biggest part about what's going on here is safety. This is a safe place where you can be who you are and not allow whatever feelings of shame and guilt and fear and anxiety about being a gay man that you may have been trained to feel as you grew up in our culture and in our society that has so many different attitudes about what a gay man is and how you should behave towards gay people. And here you can just be gay, homosexual.
While there, I also met with an old friend, Peterson Descano, who is a performer and LGBT rights activist. I had previously interviewed Peterson for a film I did on the ex-gay movement. Peterson was at the event to perform his latest work that examined transgender Bible characters.
For much of my adult life, I was a born-again, evangelical, conservative, Republican Christian who was also very anti-gay, which made my life complicated because I was gay myself. And once I sorted that out and accepted that it was okay to be gay and all, then I had to dig through all of my spirituality. What the heck do I believe? Why do I believe it? Where do these beliefs come from? Is there such a thing as queer spirituality? Definitely when you have a group of people who have been oppressed by religion, for them to develop spirituality, they typically have to do it in that context of being an oppressed people by a religion. So in essence, you have to find a new expression of spirituality that maybe other people who are oppressed by religion have also been able to find. But I think since gays, lesbians, bisexuals, transgender, queer folks have been most targeted, I think that we've been able then to break out the most into finding creative, innovative, alternative ways of expressing our spirituality and our faith. Often the queer folks are the forerunners, the shamans, the spiritual leaders, the people in the temple that are cross-dressing, that are, bringing in creative new ways of looking at it with nature and even with text and queering the text, as they talk about queering the Bible. So I think that queer people get to explore spirituality in a whole new way, because we have to own it for ourselves, and we can't always live on the traditions of others, or we have to rediscover traditions that have been lost or hidden.
While in North Carolina, I met with Holly Boswell, who I had interviewed previously for a film about transgender life. Holly is the founder of the group Kindred Spirits. She talked about the circle ritual she began and its importance in reclaiming ancient, sacred spiritual traditions important to the trans community.
Spirituality, I believe, it can be viewed as a composite or a commonality among all queer people who do step outside or beyond other conventions. However, I have seen the obvious manifestations of reclaiming goddess, for instance, and that grew out of feminism and Wicca and all of that, where there are lesbian culture that honors goddess. Similarly, gay men who have gods or a god that empowers them and they identify with. For transgender people, I think we are in the early stages of reclaiming our myths, our traditions, our heritage. There is an obvious phenomenon of transgender people feeling outside of the culture, not being welcomed or understood. When it comes to our spirituality, many of us have entered various churches or religious traditions with the hope of acceptance, rarely finding it, at least in any full-bodied, resonant way. And so I took it upon myself at last to see if I could convene a number of other transgender folks like myself who felt spiritually called on their journeys to come together and explore ways of expressing and experiencing our spirituality beyond religion, beyond dogma, yet honoring certain of the more ancient traditions that do resonate with our truth as transgender beings. We started in 1993 with a group called Kindred Spirits. We convened in Hot Springs, North Carolina, at a lovely, ancient, almost, inn up a mountain. It was just sharing our hearts and spirits. We entered this realm together in a spiritual way. It became a very powerful experience for everyone, almost an awakening to our past heritage. People were literally shaking and crying with the notion of remembering who we are. It's a powerful thing. When you've felt alone all your life in your truth, never understood or honored or respected, and then you find that you have a breadth of history that is deep and rich and full. It breathes life into you, and it breathes life into a community that is possible to emerge.
Rapidly approaching my 60s, I finally pursued a long-term passion to make documentary films. Early on, as I began to talk to queer people about their lives, I was often quite moved by their stories. There was clearly a recurring theme of the struggle so many people have putting their sexuality, and spirituality and harmony. I realized that I probably shared those thoughts and perhaps had my own unresolved feelings about religion. I think for people of my generation, most religious institutions fail to understand or meet the needs of queer people. Perhaps defining some sort of spiritual path and making peace with my own feelings towards the Catholic Church and religion in general has become more meaningful.
Maybe the church today isn't that church, and you're not that person. And maybe it won't be a Catholic church, but some other experience that feeds you in a way that you hadn't anticipated. So that you'll come out of this journey not as the objective journalist who is simply watching, but in some way transformed yourself. You know, that's what I hope.
Just as he was about to preview a cut of this film, Tom set off on his final spiritual journey. He left this planet